I think Elden Ring's DLC isn't that fun, at least for a player like me. But instead of focusing on whether the DLC is too hard or too easy, I want to explain how I think it breaks immersion and makes itself anti-fun. Also, just a little note, I didn't really intend on making this video, so I don't have a lot of footage. I'll just include some of my boss fights and have it be mostly a narration, so feel free to listen to this as you're vacuuming or fighting Radahn for your 17-hour or whatever. So for organization's sake, I'll break down my opinion in 3 distinct sections. I want to talk about exploration, bosses, and repeats. You'll see what repeats are later. If you're playing without summons, the only real reward for all different builds are the Shadow Tree fragments. But instead of them being rewards, they feel like mandatory baubles that you have to hunt down for. Because each increases the damage you deal and decreases the damage you take from enemies, they're the main way how the DLC scales. But because they're tied to exploration, and to some extent luck if you're gonna find them, you're gonna be faced with this annoying decision at the end when you're only gonna have a few left. You're either gonna have to hunt them down because you don't know where they are, and that's gonna be tedious and take some time because you're gonna have to retread and recheck every location already checked, or you're gonna have to accept that you're not gonna find the rest and you're just gonna go fight the boss while missing out on the damage bonus because you didn't go collect them. And both those options are tedious. Like, the DLC is kind of wasting your time. Because if I decided I had enough of an area, I'm like, I don't want to explore anymore. I've seen everything there is to explore. I don't want to go and enjoy every nook and cranny and check every guy's asshole to see if he's hiding a Scooby-Doo fragment. My other issue with Shadow Tree fragments is that they are very distracting. When you enter a new area, instead of enjoying the sights and seeing the wildlife and the flowers and whatnot, as I'm galloping on the horse, instead I'm checking every nook and cranny to see if there's a Shadow Tree fragment stashed away somewhere. And that's very disruptive to the flow of actually enjoying the game, especially after you beat a boss, you enter a new area, and there's just emptiness, and you're checking every single corner to see if there's a Shadow Tree fragment there, and that's not fun. So Shadow Tree fragments weren't compelling rewards to collect, because they were mandatory, and anything mandatory like that is kind of bound to be a little anti-fun. But how about some of the rest of the rewards? Well, the weapons I couldn't use, and there's only 2 Kung Fu weapons in the game, and one of them you get at the very end, which is not great. Armors are not fun either, because they're just mostly cosmetic, so they're not really improving your stats. Some of them were cool. Ashes of War are nice because they're fun to experiment with, but the rest, like consumables or even cookbooks, which just feel like they're rewards with extra homework attached to them, like it didn't feel that rewarding. I also have another bone to pick, and I see that a lot of people are arguing about players not picking or finding Shadow Tree fragments throughout the world. I feel like if the game designers have to make a public announcement outside of the game saying, hey, go pick up the Shadow Tree fragments, the game did an inherently poor job at explaining how important they are. The game does tell you need to collect them, you know, they're relevant, they're going to increase your strength, whatever, but I don't think that the players realize just how powerful they are. The difference between a level 0 and a level 20 Shadow Tree level is 100% increase in damage, and that's a lot. And if you're used to the game being difficult, I don't think the first instinct you have as a player, because this is a new mechanic, is to be like, oh, I gotta go find like 5 or 6 more levels, and then I'm gonna be able to face this boss. So I think you just need to keep that in mind, you know, before you go out and start arguing with people and telling them they're scrubs because they're not spending hours, you know, searching for Shadow Tree fragments. So the second thing I want to talk about is the bosses. And I see a lot of arguments online that if you're having trouble with a boss, you should just try a different build and just experiment. And to some extent, obviously I agree, because, you know, if it's what you're doing is not working and you keep trying to do the same thing, that's kind of crazy. But at the same time, I do feel like the game does not incentivize you to change your build. You have a limited amount of larva tiers. There's so many different phases of stones, like you can upgrade your weapon to up to 25 levels, and you need a lot of resources and materials to do that. You need a lot of, you know, stones. And it's really hard finding them, right? Like, realistically, throughout 100 hours, 150 hours of you playing the game, you can maybe, if I'm being generous, upgrade 10 different weapons to their maximum level. And the problem is that in advance, you don't know if those weapons are actually going to be good. So how is the player supposed to know that they need to upgrade a certain weapon to have an easier time with the boss. Like, the only option that's left for me, if I'm struggling, is to look online which weapon is good and then invest my resources into that, because the game isn't really charitable with how it's dishing those things out. So I feel like experimentation, absolutely, but I don't think you can experiment as much as sometimes the game feels like it needs you to, especially the DLC with how hard and overtuned some of the bosses are. But my main problem here is immersion. It's not so much that the bosses are hard, that the bosses require like different strategies and experimentation. That's all fine, that's all a part of the game and always has been. But I think the main issue for me is that the bosses feel very samey. The way you fight and approach them is very similar from one to another. It never feels like you're overcoming one challenge and then you're faced with a different challenge. It just feels like a gauntlet of the same boss fight, one after another, and you just have to kind of keep doing the same thing again. And that's, you know, like even if you enjoy that kind of combat, and I do, because I've played every single Dark Souls game and Sekiro and stuff like that, it still felt exhausting because I had to do the same thing over and over again for hours on end, and it all kind of blended together. And for me, this just made it that no boss was a really memorable experience. The only reason why I remember some of the bosses, I remember the Dancing Lion. I think it was cool because it was very lightningy and very exciting to look at, and also to some extent fight. But something like Renala, I don't remember her for how cool she was. She was just like a lady with two blades, and she just kind of went like and it just wasn't that engaging, right? So I think that's immersion breaking for me, and I think that's one of my main issues with the bosses, is that they feel very similar to each other. One of my favorite bosses was actually the Shadow Tree Avatar, and I think it's purely because it feels so novel to fight something that's just a little bit different, right? Like he kind of mixes it up, and I do enjoy that. But by far, my biggest criticism of the DLC, and maybe even Elden Ring in general, I feel like the DLC kind of added to this problem, and it kind of made Elden Ring worse in comparison, is because all the fucking repeats, man. The same enemies appear in wildly different places. I'm so tired of all the dragons and the worm boss and the birds and the bats and the regular knights and the fucking Furnace golems, man. It's really discouraging. Getting over a hard boss, you find a beautiful new area, and before you know it, it's the same fucking bird you've seen a million times before, man. It's so bad. Even like one of my favorite parts was ascending the jagged peak. I thought that was a really cinematic area. It felt like it was building up to something. You have Egon there, he's screaming, he's like, please, when you get up there, I wanna kill this giant dragon that's been haunting me. It's a Moby Dick situation, right? It's beautiful. And then right before you get to Bale, you see the fucking repeat nonsense boss Sanisax, and he's so annoying to fight. He somehow feels like he has more HP than Bale. And it's just like a very unengaging boss fight. So it's like, why does he need to be there? The game is better if you don't have him here. Just have him be dead. You know, I want to come there and just want to see Sanisax dead. I think that would bring me a lot of joy. But by far the biggest offender of this, I think, is the final boss. Because as soon as I enter the door, I see Radahn. And to me, that was the most disappointing part, because the base game Elden Ring Radahn, I didn't like him very much. I think he was kind of a boring fight as is, because at the end of the day, again, he's just a guy with two swords, and in the Elden Rings DLC, he felt like he was very janky. The way he moved around felt like he was kind of stiff, like a little robot, and all his attacks were like basic combo swings, you know, in the second phase. It still did basic combo swings with like a few nuclear explosions added on top of it, and even when you beat him, you're rewarded by a 15-second cutscene, which maybe makes sense or doesn't, depending on how invested in the lore you are, and then it's just kind of over. So the final boss being a repeat, even if it's a different boss, even if it has a different moveset, right? The presentation of the boss is similar, and I feel like the presentation of Elden Ring and Dark Souls bosses is almost as important as the actual mechanics of the fight. I think they go toe-to-toe, and I feel like they really dropped the ball on that one, at least with Radahn, at least, again, for a player like me who enjoys that kind of novelty. I know a lot of players say that the joy of Dark Souls games and Elden Ring is overcoming these hard challenges, and Miyazaki seems to agree with that. But I don't think, for a player like me, that's the only part of the equation. For me, I have a different thesis. I think for me, it's about getting over that barrier and seeing what's on the other side of it. The joy of that discovery, of seeing something new and rad and crazy and unimaginable, of something bigger than you could have possibly predicted. So with that said, I'm really glad to have experienced Shadow of the Earth Tree. And like, obviously it's good, right? I'm not arguing that this is bad in any way. I think if I was more open, and if I had tempered my expectations and just gotten more used to the Elden Ring formula, which I think is fundamentally different from the Dark Souls formula, I would have enjoyed it more. It's also a game that's impossibly big, and it's able to cater to so many different playstyles and individuals. Like, no matter what you like, there's probably something in here that you can interact with and enjoy. And I think that's a genuine, huge achievement for the studio, and that's not something that many games can say. But as is, I think some playstyles are catered to more than others, and I think that just because something is viable doesn't mean that it's necessarily fun. For a player like me, I would give it, I think, a 7 out of 10. For you, it might be a 10 out of 10 or even a 3 out of 10. If you really loved it or hated it, I want to hear how you played it. Like, did you have a guide on? Did you play the base game multiple times? What were your favorite parts? Where did you most struggle with? I really want to understand the experience of players who really enjoyed it, and also those who didn't enjoy it. If you want, please share it with me, in the comments, and we can have a little chat. Thank you so much for watching, and, I hope there's more games like this out there who are so divisive and interesting that we can actually talk about them at length and somehow it doesn't get boring. Okay, have fun, bye.